Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carruth, writer, and come with me, my love, to the sea of love. I want to tell you just how much I love you. Yes, that's right, folks. This week's movie review, we're going to be looking back at the 1989 romantic crime thriller titled Sea of Love. Now, Sea of Love runs for 1 hour and 53 minutes long. All right, it is directed by Harold Becker. It is produced by Martin Bergman and Louis A. Stroller. Let's see, the script was written by Richard Price. The score was done by Trevor Jones. The cinematography was done by Ronnie Taylor. And the editing was done by David Bretherton. And the stars of the movie are Al Pacino. We have Ellen Barkin, John Goodman, Michael Rooker. We have William Hickey, Richard Jenkins, John Spencer, Michael O'Neill. Originally in this movie was Lorraine Bracco. She played Al Pacino's, I guess it was his ex-wife or ex-lover. I believe her name was Denise. But unfortunately, they cut her scenes for some strange reason. And we also had a pre-famed Samuel L. Jackson. This was before he was a big star. Yeah, before he became a big star, he was just playing these small, menial, little minor roles with very little impact. Don't worry, he would rise to prominence in the 90s, but in the 80s, he was pretty much in the back seat. And I think probably even just saying that sounds a bit racist, but no, it's not. Oh, forget it. That wasn't racist at all. He was just a minor character. That's all I'm trying to say. All right? So before we start this whole, oh, he was just put in the back seat, that's not being racist, okay? Just to remind you, okay? I didn't say anything or mean anything bad like that. He was just a minor character. Like I said, his big stardom came around 1990 with Do the Right Thing, and then the rest is history. That's all I'm saying. So resting in the annals of highly prolific suspense thrillers like Jagged Edge and Fatal Attraction, Sea of Love has the right formula of bone-chilling suspicions of getting romantically linked with someone who could potentially kill you. That's right. You know how cops and detectives always like to try to get their man? Well, suppose the man they're trying to get is not a man, but a woman. That's right. Females can commit just as much crimes as the guys could. Just that the guys seem to somewhat are a little bit more susceptible of jail time than women. Women seem to have kind of a much more clever way of concealing their guilt rather than guys. Us were probably more open about it. Girls keep it subtle. But here in this movie, the suspect who could be a potential killer could be a female. I'm not saying it would, because that would probably give away spoilers. But who knows? Here we have Al Pacino, who looked more grizzled than his previous films. Hey, He's a method actor after all. But more in his game as homicide detective Frank Keller, who's challenging himself to a very ugly murder mystery. The victim the victims are lonely single men, and the possible perpetrator behind these grisly murders might be in the form of a female. Now these people are like writing stuff like ads in the paper or something like that. You know, like a dating site. You know, these days, of course, you don't have it's almost like a dating site. These days, we go on dating sites to look for somebody to fall in love with. But hey, this movie was set in the late '80s, so yes, they used to have ads in the paper for dates. I think that's kind of now obsolete, since now you can go online to look for dates and things like that. And they seem to be somewhat similar in connections, because the people who write dates usually tend to write like poetic verses. And then the dates usually often, they go on their date, they have dinner, they yak it up a bit, and then when they come home, when they make it back to their places, they make out, they play some music, and on the song Sea of Love, they're dead. So searching for clues to ascertain possible suspects, Frank Keller runs into another detective from Queens. He goes by the name of Sherman Toohey, played by John Goodman, who's also solving a very similar case. What's ironic is that the victims were both males who took up to rhyming ads in singles magazines looking for a relationship. Noticing the pattern, Keller and Toohey decide to falsely place ads that rhyme of their own and date all the women who respond to them. That way they can trace their fingerprints on wine glasses and compare them to the crime scene. This is a pretty clever thing. They would go incognito, as always. They would meet up with their dates, have some dinner, have some wine, and the possible perpetrators would place their hands on the glass, and that way Keller and Toohey could observe their fingerprints. Because in the end, as human beings, if there's one thing that is always going to be different, is that everybody has different patterns of fingerprints. No one's is the same. And one of the more innovative measures to ascertain the culprit, Keller arranged those sort of almost like an assembly line format, with each lonely heart eating out with Keller while Toohey is serving as their waiter. Now this is where things start to become more compelling, where one of the women, who goes by the name of Helen Kruger, played by Ellen Barkin, she has her turn to date Keller, and suddenly he becomes attracted to both her beauty and her spunk. But she plays hard to get, which could be a bad move on her. Because it's always like the one who plays hard to get is always going to be the one that could be the potential guilty suspect. I mean, yeah, they're dating, and he seems to be somewhat attracted to her character and her beauty, but she's playing hard to resist. And of all the other people who are very cooperative in drinking from the wine glass and putting their hands on the glass, she walks out on him and doesn't touch the wine. But Keller somehow still seems somewhat infatuated by her beauty and her character. And he makes it his own mission to go out and look for this Helen Kruger all over Manhattan, the Bronx, maybe Queens, who knows. Keller eventually steps out of line professionally and gets into more dangerous territory as he meets up with Helen again at a market where she works at a shoe store. Only this time now they seem a little more better acquainted with each other, to the point where they became romantically attracted to one another. But, you know, the reason why I say unprofessionally is because, not because I'm saying that he doesn't have any permission to do it. Hey, he's a big boy. He's in his mid-40s. He doesn't need permission from anyone. But the fact of the matter is, he's doing something kind of dangerous and a little bit foolhardy and maybe even somewhat naive due to his own attraction to this lady. But the worst part is, she could be a potential possible killer. I'm not saying she is, but she could be. Because we have reasons to suspect that the culprit behind these killings is actually done by a woman. And that this Helen Kruger seems to come across as being more guilty than the other people who are doing this assembly line speed dating thing that with Keller. So he's kind of like stepping over the line between his personal infatuation and his professional line of work. But the romantic angle is not a true one, but a scheme to find out if Helen is in fact the murderer. There are a myriad of evidence that's proven accurate and many more that's convincing. Taking a few pages of Glenn Close's attraction to Jeff Bridges' character from Jagged Edge, Keller seems more determined to rather sacrifice his life for this potential suspect, as Helen seems to have a metaphoric love spell on him, and the worst part is, he just doesn't seem to care. He doesn't care if his life is on the line, or that she could be a possible murderer, or maybe a conspirator behind a murder. No. He just loved her for her physical attraction. And believe it or not, she is a pretty face. She's not sore on the eyes. But she's very mysterious, and she could be very suspicious and even potentially dangerous. And the worst part is, he just doesn't give a shit. This all seems to be proven effectively, at least until near the end, where the solution just decides to throw an awkward curveball at you. This is where the biggest weakness in this movie is that all of a sudden, I guess they were maybe like rushed to limited times, but all of a sudden a twist comes like just near the end that catches you off guard. Now, usually I'm always in the mood for surprises, but this is actually a surprise that really didn't work very well, and that this whole catch you by surprise thing just did not materialize very well. And I was thinking, maybe, this movie actually was very, very good. I mean, I'm glad that they didn't make this romantic comedy into this schmaltzy, mushy type of romantic comedy. This romantic comedy actually has some thriller, some suspense, some intensity, and some fear. Some fear for our protagonist. Because he doesn't know who he's dealing with. He could be dealing with somebody who may or may not kill him. And yet, he doesn't care. He's breaking all the professional boundaries just so that he could get into her pants. Or she can get into his pants, whichever comes first. But then at the end, we turn out that she wasn't actually the killer after all. She was just the ex-girlfriend of the killer. And it turns out to be just somebody just thrown in randomly at the end. With no character development. If we would have seen him in many other scenes, trying to play off as the innocent, nice guy, only to turn out that he was an evil bastard, then there probably would have been a little more story to it and a little more understanding. But no, they just threw somebody in just from out of nowhere without any introduction or anything like that. And it turns out that he was the one who was behind all these killings. And that's where the big weakness is. The real meal ticket here is, to make this movie really work, was the amazing performance by Al Pacino, who, by the way, was gone for quite a substantial period of time. Between 1985 to 1989, Al Pacino was kind of gone from the Hollywood industry. We were all thinking that maybe at the time he was retiring from acting because of one really bad movie and that got really bad reviews. And even though it's not his fault entirely, he did feel kind of somewhat hurt and maybe even part to blame for the badness of this movie. Maybe he thought he was losing his credibility as a Hollywood star, so he was kind of like out of the small screen, out of the picture for about 4 years. That doesn't necessarily mean he was just staying at home and being a recluse and counting his money. No. During his 4-year sabbatical, he was still performing, but he was more or less doing his other big passion, and that was theater work. He was doing stuff like William Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, Bertolt Brecht's The Irresistible Rise of Arturo Ui. One of them has the name Pavlo Hummel. I don't really quite remember the entire name of the title. He was in that. He also did a theatrical version of Glengarry Glen Ross, which also eventually transferred to the silver screen, where Pacino reprised his role and was also nominated for Best Actor in a Supporting Role back in 93, I think. The Academy Awards in 93. So, no, he didn't, was just like staying home and sulking for the last 4 years. He was still, kept himself active in performing, but just not on the screen. He was doing theatrical work. But it was a great comeback for him. And I actually thought he did quite a good job in his comeback. And that we knew that he was destined to make a comeback. We all were embracing the moment that he was going to come back to acting. And I'm just glad he didn't let his fan base down. So I would say good for him. Another great performance was Ellen Barkin as this mysterious Helen Kruger. She truly did very, very good by keeping us in suspense the whole time. She also, like I said, she's not sore on the eyes. And she also has some great acting chops to boot. And there was a lot of great chemistry between Pacino and Barkin that really, truly shined. Barkin truly seems to amazingly outshine a legend like Al Pacino, and that's definitely no easy task. Also, you got to give hats off to John Goodman. He also gave a great supporting performance too. Great to see him actually kind of step out of the comedy realms to actually play something a little more on the dramatic side. And, he wasn't just playing this big, lovable teddy bear type character that you see as Dan Connor and Roseanne. He was playing more of a serious-minded type of character, but he also played it very effectively. There is some humor in this movie, too. It's not just crime. It's not just thriller. It's not just suspense. Well, there's some romance, yes. But there's also some light touches of humor that goes on in this movie, too. Maybe not like over-the-top humor or toilet humor or things like that, but more or less, like one that would probably put a nice little chuckle here and there. Nothing too explicit, but still, it exists there. Like I said, a lot of crime thrillers sometimes needs a little bit of humor to get through with all the grittiness that goes on. There's not too much grittiness in this movie. There's no massive body counts and all. Just the suspicions and the fears for our protagonist is what really, really happens here. There's no denying that Barkin is very dedicated to her craft. I mean, her performance in 1987's The Big Easy was golden. And here, her energy lights up the room every time she stalks at her prey. And her embracing towards Pacino is definitely quite bone-chilling. For Al Pacino, this is just a bit of a reminder of all the grittier roles he once played back in the 70s, from the Godfather series to Serpico to Dog Day Afternoon. He was in these kind of movies. This is long before he slipped into more Oscar caliber roles and more lighter material, with the exception of Scarface, which is anything but light. As Frank Keller, he's focused, he's complex, he's resourceful, and he's a very, very believable individual. John Goodman, who's more known for being a comedic actor, plays a more straight-laced character here as he becomes concerned over the potential dangers his friend is putting himself on by dating a woman who may or may not kill him. Like I said, this movie definitely works on so many levels, whether it's a crime drama, a thriller, a romance, with maybe just a small pinch of comedy here and there, but not too much. Like I said, the red herring comes near the end, where everything just seems to just come out of nowhere without any development. I mean, if you're going to throw a villain into the story, at least let him or her have some airtime. Make them play off like, oh, geez, I wouldn't think anything of this guy or this girl. They seem like down-to-earth, nice people. He seems quite friendly, or she seems very polite. She took me out to dinner. We were talking, and he or she didn't seem like a threat, and then all of a sudden we turn out that this nice guy or this nice girl is just an evil person, and that they had certain issues and conflicts with a certain individual. But no, we didn't get any of that. We just got a mysterious serial killer from out of nowhere, just came at us in left field, and we were like, who's he? What's his purpose? What's his beef? There was none of that. It was just somebody just thrown out there. And that's kind of like where it becomes bad. Up until then, everything seemed to be really good. The whole mystery thing was just pretty bone-chilling. But we felt cheated near the end. I really don't like it when a randomized character comes out of nowhere and turns out to be the killer. I can get twists, but I hate the feeling of being shortchanged, and this is where the film loses quite a bit of points. We as mystery lovers want to participate in solving these cases. We want to think that a person who's been on quite a lot might be the potential killer. But then we get somebody like completely out of nowhere. But we also want to do our bit of sleuthing, our bit of our detective work. But we weren't able to do that because we felt cheated. Part of the fun about mystery movies is trying to is to try to pick out who could be potential killers. But we don't get any of that. We just get somebody from out of random. And that's a shame because, up until then, director Harold Becker had a really good gold standard type movie. But then he drains us out at the last minute. I was mesmerized by the characters and the elements that with the enjoyment of Sea of Love. But in the end, I felt kind of let down with a good case that ended too soon. I just ran out of ideas, making it feel too rushed. And that's where the main weakness is to this movie. It had potential to be really up there, but then it really drained us badly when we felt cheated near the end. Am I going to give it a strong point value? Does it pass, in my opinion? Of course it does. I was hoping I was going to give it a high pass, but unfortunately, if I was to give a scale out of 10, I think it's only fair that I should give Sea of Love a 7, because in the end it really let me down. Everything else was really good, but the twist in the end just didn't do me in. It's a shame. I mean, it was really good to see Al Pacino come back, but I just hoped that when he did make a comeback, he was going to come back in a big way. But we're just going to have to wait a few more years for him to really start to play off bigger, better parts. He eventually would, Scent of a Woman was an Oscar-winning film for him in '92. He was also nominated for playing Gary Glenn Ross that same year. So, I guess to sort of get back on your good graces, you have to start somewhere, and I guess this is it. I was very impressed by the performances of both Ellen Barkin and John Goodman. And overall, the atmosphere was really good. The direction was pretty good until the end by Harold Becker. I thought the script was very good. Great that it keeps you in suspension most of the time until the end. And I would recommend person to see this movie. So yes, like I said, if I was to give it a scale out of 10, I would definitely give Sea of Love a 7. Could have been an 8 or a 9, but it failed me in the end. It's a shame. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules. Be calm, be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Writer singing "Come with me, my love, to the sea of love. I wanna tell you just how much I love you." Do, 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 do.